peace be upon you, and welcome to a new episode. One day in June 1984, security authorities in Giza Governorate received a shocking report. The report stated that two bodies had been discovered in an extremely horrific scene. The first victim was a young man in his 20s, and the second was an elderly man. Both had been murdered in a particularly brutal manner. But what made the case even more mysterious was that the killer didn't simply hide the crime in one location. Instead, they scattered parts of the two bodies across multiple governorates, as if deliberately trying to make it as difficult as possible for anyone to uncover the truth. As the investigation began, detectives were able to identify the two victims, and the discovery was even more shocking. The victims turned out to be a father and his son, members of the same family. From that moment on, the entire case took a completely different direction. If you think that most murders happen because of money, inheritance, or an ordinary argument, this story will change your mind. The real motive behind the crime was hidden inside a house that appeared perfectly ordinary from the outside. A father was working abroad to provide a better life for his family, while the rest of the household stayed behind, waiting for his return. To the neighbors, they seemed like a quiet, respectable family, with nothing that would ever raise suspicion. But the truth was completely different. Behind that peaceful image was a dangerous secret concealed within the walls of the house, a secret that ultimately led to this horrific crime. If you stay with me until the end of the video, you'll discover how investigators managed to solve the mystery and how every small piece of evidence brought them one step closer to a truth that no one could have imagined. The story began a few days before the bodies were discovered. Around that time, Wajdi's father, who was also Samay's grandfather, noticed that he had been unable to reach either his son or his grandson for quite some time. He tried calling them several times, but no one answered. Eventually, he went to the police station in Giza to report them missing. He told investigators that his son, Wajdi, who worked as a teacher in one of the Gulf countries, and his grandson, Samay, a medical student in his second-to-last year of school, had been missing for several days. What made the situation even more alarming was that they both lived in the same house, so the fact that they disappeared together at the same time was highly unusual. The officer who took the report immediately sensed that something wasn't right, especially since the family was well known in the neighborhood. Samay had a reputation as a respectful, hard-working young man, and there was no obvious reason why he would suddenly leave home without informing anyone. Investigators then began questioning neighbors and relatives. Nearly everyone gave the same account. They described Samay as a disciplined young man with a normal relationship with his father, and no one knew of any conflicts between them. During the investigation, detectives visited the family's home and met Samay's mother, Nadia. When they asked where her husband and son were, her calm response immediately caught their attention. She claimed she had no idea where they were. She suggested that her husband might have traveled for work, while Samay was probably studying at a friend's house. On the surface, her explanation sounded believable, but the way Nadia spoke was unusual. She showed no signs of concern or fear, even though both her husband and son had been missing for days. That reaction was the first thing that made the lead investigator suspect that something was being hidden, and that the case was far more complicated than two people simply leaving home. Although the detectives found Nadia's behavior suspicious, they had no evidence at that point to prove that anything was wrong. They decided to expand the investigation. They first visited the stationery shop where Samay regularly bought his textbooks. After that, they went to the medical school and interviewed his classmates. Every single one of them said the same thing. Samay was an exceptionally dedicated student who rarely missed lectures, and he had disappeared on a specific day without anyone seeing him afterward. The investigators then looked into Wajdi's background. They spoke with people who had known him for years, and with those connected to his previous workplace before he began working abroad. Everyone described him in the same way: a respectable man with a good reputation who had no known disputes or enemies. Every piece of information they uncovered pointed to the same conclusion. The father and son had been living quiet, ordinary lives, and there was no clear reason to explain their sudden disappearance. That only made the case more puzzling and strengthened the lead investigator's determination to pursue every possible lead, no matter how small, until the full truth was uncovered. After several days of continuous searching, a new report completely changed the direction of the investigation. A group of farmers in a remote area contacted the authorities after discovering the body of a young man abandoned among the trees in Al-Basatin. Investigators immediately rushed to the scene. As they examined the body, they were met with a horrifying sight. The victim was a young man in his 20s, and it was immediately clear that he had died in a brutal attack. There were visible marks of strangulation around his neck, and his body had also been stabbed multiple times with a sharp knife. The nature of the injuries left little doubt that this was not the result of an ordinary fight, but a deliberate and calculated murder. Detectives then reviewed the missing persons reports they had received and compared the body's description with the information in those reports. After completing the comparison, they confirmed that the victim was Sameh, the medical student whose family had reported him missing just days earlier. The discovery of Sameh's body was devastating, but it also raised an even more troubling question. If Sameh had been murdered in such a horrific way, then where was his father, Wajdi? Since the father and son had disappeared together at the same time, investigators feared that Wajdi had also fallen victim to the same killer, and that they were only beginning to uncover a much larger and more disturbing crime. Soon afterward, another report came in, but this time from Al-Manufia Governorate. The report was about the discovery of an elderly man's body in a remote agricultural area. When investigators arrived at the scene, they were met with a horrifying surprise. The body was missing its head. From the very first moment, they knew they were not dealing with an ordinary murder. It was clear that the killer had deliberately separated the head from the body and disposed of each part in a different location to make it more difficult for investigators to identify the victim and delay the investigation. After an extensive search, the victim's head was eventually found in the Saqqara area near Haram, a considerable distance from where the body had been discovered. Once investigators put all the pieces together, they realized that Sameh's body had been found in one location, his father's body in another, and the father's head in a third. The way the bodies had been disposed of pointed to one conclusion: this crime had been carefully planned in advance. Whoever committed it had taken the time to transport the remains and scatter them across multiple governorates. That meant the killer was not acting in the heat of the moment, but was carrying out a calculated plan. The criminal investigation team went back to the beginning and reviewed every detail once again. After examining the crime scenes and analyzing the evidence, they reached an important conclusion. Everything suggested that the killer knew both victims well and had been able to spend time with them without raising their suspicions or causing them to flee or fight back. This led investigators to believe that the murders had most likely taken place inside an enclosed location, with the family home being the most likely crime scene. Even more puzzling was the almost complete absence of signs of a struggle. There was no evidence of a fight, no indication that either victim had tried to defend himself, and nothing to suggest that they realized they were in danger. That prompted investigators to consider a crucial possibility. the father and son may not have been awake when the murders were carried out. Instead, they may have been in a deep sleep, which would explain why there were virtually no signs of resistance. This theory became the first real breakthrough in the investigation. It completely changed the direction of the case and convinced detectives to return to the family's house, believing that the entire truth had been hidden there all along, within the walls of the home itself. To understand how this case reached such a tragic ending, we need to go back a few years. Wajdi had been married to Nadia for many years, and they had two children, Sameh, who was studying medicine, and Sama, who was a high school student at the time. Like many men of his generation, Wajdi traveled to one of the Gulf countries for work in order to provide a better life for his family. He left his wife and children living in their home in Giza, believing he was making a sacrifice for their future. But his long absence became the beginning of a chain of events that would eventually change the family's lives forever. As time passed, Nadia began to feel intensely lonely. She felt that no one listened to her or cared about her, and according to her later confession, this feeling was not new. She said that, ever since childhood, she had always felt abandoned by the people closest to her, first by her father and brother, and later by her husband after he traveled abroad and left her alone. When Nadia was still in high school, Wajdi, who was her teacher at the time and would later become her husband, became captivated by her beauty. During a moment of weakness, he sexually assaulted her. As a result, Nadia became pregnant. When she noticed changes in her body, she had no choice but to tell her family what had happened. To avoid public scandal, her family arranged for her to undergo an abortion. Afterward, to protect her reputation, they asked Wajdi to marry her, and he agreed. The marriage took place, and sometime later Wajdi received a job opportunity in one of the Gulf countries and traveled abroad for work. The constant feeling of abandonment made Nadia emotionally attached to anyone who showed her attention. During a period when she was dealing with health problems and frequently visiting doctors, she met a man named Ahmed, who worked as a driver. At first, their relationship was nothing more than a casual acquaintance, but over time they grew closer, and eventually the relationship became an extramarital affair. Nadia began meeting him regularly. She knew very well that what she was doing was wrong, yet she continued the relationship. She later admitted that she felt a strange sense of satisfaction while betraying her husband, as though she were taking revenge on him for leaving to work abroad and forcing her to face life alone. As the days passed, the affair grew stronger and began to dominate her decisions, without her ever imagining that it would eventually lead to one of the most horrific crimes imaginable. But Ahmed was not simply an ordinary lover. He had a dominant and controlling personality. Once their relationship became serious, he began threatening Nadia, telling her that if she ever tried to leave him or end the affair, he would expose their relationship to everyone. As a result, Nadia felt trapped under his control rather than being in a voluntary romantic relationship. She became as afraid of him as she was emotionally attached to him. What made the situation even more remarkable was that during the same period, Nadia continued to attend the mosque and pray regularly. It was as though she were living two completely different lives at the same time, one that appeared religious and respectable, and another that was entirely hidden from everyone around her. The affair did not remain a secret for long. Many people in the neighborhood where the family lived began to notice what was happening and started talking about it. Nadia's reputation suffered, and even her daughter Sama began speaking negatively about her among the neighbors. Eventually, the rumors reached Sama's grandfather. Realizing that something was seriously wrong during his son's absence, He contacted Wajdi and urged him to return to Egypt as quickly as possible to check on his family and his home. Sometime later, Sama's father returned to Egypt, shortly before the murders took place. After his return, he discovered that his wife, Nadia, was involved in an affair with Ahmed. At first, when Wajdi confronted Nadia with what he had heard, she denied everything. But as he continued pressing her, she admitted to part of the truth. She tried to convince him that people were exaggerating the situation and that the neighbors were spreading rumors to destroy their family. She then broke down in tears, complaining about the loneliness she had endured over the years. She told him that she had spent so many years alone because of his constant work abroad, and that she had simply needed someone to care about her. Sama's father found himself in an impossible position. On one hand, he could not ignore his suspicions. On the other, he was afraid that making a hasty decision would destroy the family he had spent years working so hard to build. He loved his family and could not bear the thought of seeing it fall apart after all those years. As a result, he remained torn, unable to fully believe her, yet unable to take a firm stand. That hesitation had serious consequences. Nadia realized that there would be no real consequences for her actions, and that she could continue her relationship with Ahmed without fear. At the same time, her relationship with Ahmed grew even stronger. It was no longer just an emotional affair. It also became tied to financial interests. Nadia began encouraging her husband to invest the money he had earned while working in the Gulf, instead of letting it sit unused. She eventually suggested that he buy a car and operate it as a taxi. On the surface, it seemed like a practical investment that would generate income for the family. In reality, however, Nadia had another motive. She wanted Ahmed to be the one driving the taxi, giving him a steady source of income while also providing a perfectly natural excuse for him to be around the family's home without raising anyone's suspicions. Life continued that way for some time. Sama's father was back home, but the affair continued in secret. Meanwhile, Sama began noticing strange things. He started to suspect that someone was putting something into the food or tea served to him and his sister Sama at night. After dinner, they would become unusually drowsy and fall into an unnaturally deep sleep. In reality, Nadia had been secretly adding sleeping pills to their drinks each night to make sure they would not wake up or witness anything that happened in the house after dark. The tension between the husband and wife grew worse with each passing day, not only because of the affair itself, but also because, after learning about it, Sama's father began closely monitoring Nadia's behavior and questioning everything she did. Nadia felt as though the walls were closing in around her. During that same period, she repeatedly asked her husband for a divorce, not because she intended to marry Ahmed officially, but because she wanted to free herself from a marriage that, in her eyes, had become emotionally empty. Each time, Sama's father refused. His refusal only intensified her frustration and left her feeling trapped between her family life and her secret relationship. At the same time, Sama sensed that something had changed inside the house. The atmosphere was no longer the same. His father had become unusually quiet and constantly preoccupied, as though something heavy was weighing on his mind. As time passed, Sama's suspicions grew stronger. He kept asking himself what had happened and why his father had changed so dramatically. With every passing day, he became more convinced that something was seriously wrong. Nadia sensed that her son was beginning to suspect the truth, and she became frightened. She feared that at any moment he might uncover what was happening and tell his father everything he had learned. If that happened, she believed she would lose everything: her home, her reputation, and her relationship with Ahmed, which had become more important to her than anything else. The fear of having her secret exposed, the fear that her husband might finally take decisive action against her, and her determination to preserve her relationship with Ahmed all combined to place her under enormous psychological pressure. Instead of looking for a way to end the crisis peacefully, she gradually began considering a far more dangerous solution. That was when the idea of eliminating Sama's father, and Sama as well, began to take shape. She believed that her son had become a potential witness, and that his very existence now threatened the secret she had been trying so desperately to hide. On the night of the murders, in June 1984, the plan was carried out in cold blood. As she did every evening, Nadia prepared dinner and tea, secretly mixing the usual sleeping medication into the drinks. Same's father and Same fell into a deep sleep, completely unaware of the danger they were in. Ahmed was already inside the house. Together, Ahmed, Nadia, and her daughter Sama strangled the father and son while they slept. Afterward, they used a knife to make absolutely certain that both victims were dead. The sheer brutality of the attack reflected the depth of Nadia's fear that her secret would be exposed, so much so that she chose to kill even her own son. Once the murders were completed, they turned to disposing of the bodies, a plan that had clearly been prepared in advance. Same's body was transported to a remote area in Al-Basatin and abandoned there. His father's body was taken to Al-Manufia Governorate and dumped in an agricultural area. Before that, however, his head had been severed and discarded separately in the Saqqara area near Haram, far away from the rest of the body. By scattering the remains across different locations, the killers hoped to delay the identification of the victims and buy themselves as much time as possible before investigators uncovered the truth. After detectives found the two bodies and connected them to the original missing persons report, the investigation expanded significantly. They began gathering information about the family's life and reputation in the neighborhood. It was then that rumors about Nadia and her suspicious relationship started to surface, along with the suspicions that had existed among the neighbors even before the murders. Investigators brought Nadia in for questioning. At first, she denied any involvement and gave inconsistent explanations about her husband and son's disappearance, claiming they had traveled. But as the evidence continued to mount, detectives questioned her daughter, Sama, separately. Terrified and overwhelmed by the pressure, Sama broke down and confessed to every detail of the crime. She identified Ahmed as their accomplice in the murders and revealed that her mother had been secretly using sleeping medication every night to drug the victims. Sama's confession became the turning point in the investigation. Detectives tracked down Ahmed and arrested him. They confronted him with the evidence they had gathered through the investigation and with Sama's detailed confession. At first, Ahmed denied any involvement, insisting that he was merely a friend of Nadia and had nothing to do with the murders. But when investigators confronted him with highly specific details that only someone directly involved could have known, he realized there was no point in continuing to deny it. In the end, he confessed to his role in the crime. He stated that Nadia had been the driving force behind the plan and confirmed that all three of them had participated in planning the murders. He attempted to justify his actions by claiming that he had been under Nadia's influence. When news of the case spread through the neighborhood where the family had lived, the shock was greater than anyone had imagined. Those who had long spoken negatively about Nadia felt that their suspicions had been justified, although none of them had ever imagined the situation would escalate into such a horrific double murder. Those who had defended her and dismissed the rumors as mere gossip were even more stunned when they learned that she had personally participated in killing her own son. The case quickly became the talk of the community and remained a cautionary story for years afterward, illustrating how outward appearances of piety and respectability can sometimes conceal a completely different reality behind closed doors. The case was eventually referred to the Giza Criminal Court, where the trial attracted widespread public and media attention. The details revealed during the investigation had deeply shocked the public. A mother accused of helping murder her own son, and a wife accused of plotting the murder of the husband who had spent years working abroad to provide for her and their children. Prosecutors presented all of the physical evidence they had gathered, including forensic findings that confirmed the presence of sedative substances in both victims' bodies, Sama's detailed confession, and Ahmed's statements, which corroborated every stage of the planning and execution of the crime. The defense attempted to argue for leniency on various grounds, but the brutality of the murders and the shocking details of the case left little room for any meaningful reduction in punishment. In the end, the court sentenced Nadia and her lover, Ahmed, to death by hanging, finding them to be the principal planners and perpetrators of the murders. As required in all death penalty cases in Egypt, the case was referred to the Grand Mufti for his advisory opinion on the death sentence. After the Mufti issued an opinion supporting the ruling, the death sentences were finalized. As for Sama, because of her age at the time of the crime and her more limited role, she did not personally kill anyone but concealed the crime out of fear of her mother. The court sentenced her to 10 years in prison. The day of the execution finally arrived. Minutes before the sentence was carried out, Nadia asked to perform 2 units of prayer, as if seeking forgiveness in the final moments of her life. After finishing her prayers, she requested a cup of coffee and repeatedly said that life had ruined her and destroyed her family. Just before the execution, she turned to the prison warden and made one final request, asking him to look after her daughter Sama and take care of her. Ahmed, meanwhile, sat in another room drinking several cups of coffee and chain-smoking cigarettes, as though trying to escape the reality of what was about to happen. He kept telling those present that Nadia was responsible for everything, claiming that she had lured him into the affair and drawn him into the entire crime from the very beginning. Both Nadia and Ahmed entered the execution chamber wearing the red uniforms designated for prisoners sentenced to death. In their final moments, each tried to place the blame on the other, as though each wanted to convince themselves that they were not truly responsible for what had happened. Before the sentence was carried out, Ahmed asked the executioner not to cover his eyes, because he wanted to see the world until his very last moment. His request was denied, and the executioner followed the standard procedures. The story ended with both Nadia and Ahmed being executed on the same day, bringing to a close a long chain of betrayal, conspiracy, and bloodshed. This was not simply an ordinary murder case. It was the story of how a man who left home to provide a better life for his family, combined with years of loneliness and repeated feelings of abandonment, became part of a tragedy that destroyed an entire household. It was also a story of how fear of public disgrace could drive someone to abandon even the most basic maternal instincts and take part in the murder of her own son. The crime shocked Giza Governorate at the time and remained one of the region's most widely remembered criminal cases, often cited as an example of how an illicit relationship can end in unimaginable tragedy. Even today, whenever this case is retold, one question continues to linger without a clear answer. Could Same's father have saved his son if he had taken decisive action the moment he learned of the affair? Or was this tragic ending set in motion the day he chose to remain silent and overlook what was unfolding before his eyes. That unanswered question is one of the reasons this case continues to be remembered after so many years, serving as a powerful reminder of the consequences of remaining silent when a difficult but decisive action is needed. And with that, today's episode comes to an end. If this is your first time on the channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you receive all the new episodes. See you in a new episode. Goodbye.